There you go, we're live. Hi everyone. Very happy to introduce Barnaby Jameson. Do you want to start us off with an introduction to you and your book? Will I
Sure, I'd be delighted, Kaz. And first of all, I'd like to say it's a real honour and a pleasure to address everybody this evening. My name is Barnaby Jameson. If you want the full shooting match, it's Barnaby Jameson KC, because I have I wear a separate hat or a separate wig as a barrister, and I practice in counter-terrorism, mainly in London, but otherwise around the country. And then the other hat that I wear is as an author. And you, Kaz, have been brave enough to delve into Codename Madeline, which is my first novel, which came out in 2022. But I have had various legal books that I've published in the past. And there's a sequel to Codename Madeline, which I hope is going to be coming out next year. And as you know, Codename Madeline is the fictionalized life of a famous wartime agent whose codename was Madeline. And I'm sure as we go on, we'll unravel her real name. But I don't lead with it so that people don't, in a sense, scroll straight to the ending. But she was an extremely exotic, as you know, Second World War spy of Indian descent who went on into the pantheon of myths in terms of some of the bravest agents of the Second World War.
So I actually knew who it was about from the title.
Okay.
When I thought you were talking about it.
So yeah, you're the one person that busted me just from the code name. Yeah, I'm very happy to say it's Noor Inayat Khan. But for those who want to read the book, I would perhaps discourage them from going straight to Wikipedia and reading it simply as a novel. You know, it's one of those things. Of course, there's nothing to stop you finding out what happened to her, but to keep the suspense going, it's perhaps better, if you want to, just to keep yourself in blissful ignorance before you start.
Fair enough. I taught about her when we were doing Remembrance Day and things, so I remembered her story a little bit.
Yeah.
And I will say I'm enjoying it knowing the story.
Okay, well that's good to know.
So I do think if you do know what happens, I don't think it spoils the enjoyment of the book.
Okay, well that's a very helpful and yeah, it's a very helpful comment. I mean, we know what happens in Hamlet. It doesn't stop us enjoying the play.
My favourite book of last year was a book based on a real story, and you could Google it and know what happened to the person, and it didn't matter.
Okay.
The story was about like how they got there. So I don't think it matters.
Okay, good.
But yeah, you've got it's quite a long book for a crime novel.
You're not the first person to say this, and yeah, it is quite a long book, and it covers a 30-year period. There's about 30 at least characters. There's two world wars. There's Sufi mysticism. There's submarines. There's cyanide. There's unarmed combat. There's Sufism, and so there's an awful lot in it. I mean, one of the people that I read when I was quite young was Sebastian Faulks, who wrote Birdsong. And I think compared to Birdsong, I think this book is actually quite a lot shorter. And if it's any consolation, the original draft of this book was actually longer by about probably 30% before it was cut down. You, as an author, you always have this concern that had you rewritten the book, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, might you have made it a little bit shorter? The answer is probably yes, a little bit, but not significantly.
It is. Before I came to do this, I was just showing my husband the book, because it's beautifully printed. There's whole like bits of codes and all sorts in it, isn't it? And yes. I was like, you don't get many books where you get it. It's just like so lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Like different bits that stand out. Like the quotes are sometimes in italics and
a lot of care was taken actually on the print and on the cover design and on the back. And if you turn to the back of the book, it may not be sort of that obvious, but the background of the book is actually meant to be Sufi tiles or Sufi design. And so it all sort of taps into the fact that there's a meeting of the religious side of this book as well as the wartime aspect of it.
Yes, because you start with a bit about her dad, don't you? And there's a lot of quotes from Rumi
Yes.
throughout, who's quite a fascinating person to read.
I agree. I think this is the only spy book that quotes extensively from Rumi. It's unusual in that respect.
It is, yeah, definitely unusual. I mean, it's the first crime book I've read in quite a while that quotes extensively from Rumi. It's not the only one, but it is the first I've read in a while.
Yeah.
Did you deliberately choose to do that? I mean, did you have to go and do a lot of research about?
Yeah, I mean, a book like this is a sort of, if you like, it's a sort of descent into madness because there are so many moving parts to it. There's a religious, philosophical, theosophical aspect to the book, as well as some very practical research into, war, what actually happens in war. And then with regard to the protagonist of this book, she goes on a journey from being a sort of pacifist musician from a peaceful, sort of pacifist tradition to signing up, first of all, to the WAF, to the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and then signing up as an agent. I'm not sure how far you've sort of got into the book, but it follows a journey of somebody who joins the Special Operations Executive. And so in order to write a book like this, you've got to know about Rumi, but you've also got to know about the practicalities of becoming a spy in World War II, the induction process, the training you go through, the cryptography. She was a wireless operator and much more technical than I would have ever have been capable of. But to be a wireless operator, you needed to be an extremely good engineer. You need to be able to look after your radio, to be able to deal with, transmissions in an urban situation as well as a non-urban situation, to fix your radio if it went wrong. And you also needed to know an awful lot about cryptography. And you pointed to some of the passages in the book. But the way that cryptography worked in World War II with this organization is that agents carried part of a poem that was given to them before they went out, and that was used as a transcription key. And so to be a successful agent, you needed to be a good engineer, a good cryptographer, and somebody with an enormous amount of day-to-day courage. And in the case of this agent, she was also, her records say, was actually a very good shot as well, perhaps surprisingly.
Does some of your background help with writing the story? Because I feel like you studied in France, am I right?
I did.
The languages and things is probably a thing that helps you write the story.
Yeah, you've done your research, Kaz, and I studied in France. I've always had an affinity for France. I do speak some. It's not as good as it should be, but I do speak French, and I think it's knowing a bit about France. I've spent quite a lot of time in Paris, so you've got a familiarity with some of the settings of the book. But one of the characters in the book, I don't know whether you've come to him yet, was a half French, half English barrister by the name of Francis Suttle, who went over to set up the main SOE network in Paris. And parts of the book follow the life of a barrister who then becomes an SOE agent. And so that is why in the interwar years, there are visits to the Old Bailey through this young barrister. And that's a world that's familiar to me, obviously, through my own work. So it gives it, I hope, a little bit more authenticity. And then the one other thing I was going to say about that is that Francis Suttle, his code name was Prosper, has got a son, also called Francis Suttle, who's about 80. And he's somebody he's still alive, and I've actually spoken to him at some length. And so talking to Suttle's son, you get a real understanding that the world that we're, dealing with in this book isn't completely gone. And of course, Francis Suttle remembers his dad from when he was very small. So he knew somebody that was in the book.
We've got Sam and Sarah have both commented already. Sarah's an RAF family person. I'm guessing she's the person who said that she guessed who the person was from the title.
Got it.
Because she'll have some knowledge of that.
I was going to say, I mean, if it's of interest to, was it Sarah, your friend?
Yeah.
My grandfather served in the RAF in World War II, and he was in a slightly out of the way theatre, which has been a little bit forgotten about, but he was in East Africa, he was in Ethiopia, where the British and the Ethiopians had allied to expel Mussolini's troops from the capital and restore Haile Selassie to the throne. But it was through my grandfather's work as an RAF man. He was what they call a special duties officer. So I think enough time has gone past me to say that he was working with the RAF, but he was also working with SOE and SIS. And it was through him that I actually got interested originally in SOE, through the RAF.
There's the other thing that stands out best. I mean, apart from the fact that you've chosen a sort of a true person who I think more people should know about, there's some interesting kind of side characters throughout. Like, you weave their stories through, don't you? It's not just told from our main protagonist point of view. There's quite a few other people. I haven't worked out why they're all there yet, because I'm still only 200 pages in.
Well, I think the truth of the matter is that it's an ambitious book, and I think it's also quite an ambitious read. And so anybody that actually does read it, I take my hat off to, because, as you say, there are a number of sort of intertwining stories. I think what would be great, if it were possible, would be to have a follow-up to this this evening, when you've finished the book, hopefully, and then seen how everything has kind of tied together at the end. One of the reviews put it that there appears to be some degree of method to my madness. Not putting any higher.
I mean, I've made one connection with Treasure, who is literally one of my favourite characters in the entire book. I absolutely love her.
She's great.
And I've kind of worked out where she's going. I had an aha moment.
Yeah, well, that's great. And it's a bit of a riddle, the book, and it's a bit of a detective story. But I sort of hope that one of the satisfying aspects of reading the book is how, at the beginning, I set these various hairs running, and it's really working out which way they're going to go and how everything kind of comes together at the end. And one of the people in the book that I think you may yet to meet makes a cameo appearance, and then he becomes the protagonist for the next book. And then you've got a whole range of other characters that are all intertwined. So hopefully it's a bit of a detective story as well as a war story.
I was going to ask you if there's going to be more.
Yes, this book is called Codename Madeline, and the next book is called Codename God Given.
Okay.
And without giving too much of Madeline away, we know that she's a wireless operator and she goes to occupied Paris. Codename God Given is also a wireless operator who actually trained with Noor, who then has his own war, goes out to Lyon, Paris. And I suppose the similarity is that the two agents are both, how would I describe it, sort of oddballs, misfits. I mean, Noor is a musician from a Sufi mystic family, and the protagonist of book 2 is a former circus acrobat who then becomes an actor in the interwar years. And by the time he gets to SOE, he's a sort of slightly washed up matinee idol with what you might call bachelor tendencies. And so the conflict with him is his sexuality and how that sort of plays out in a war situation. the conflict in this book is really the pacifist and how her war develops and how she's able to, in a sense, justify going to war in a potentially armed capacity. That's the tension at the heart of Madeline, and at the heart of the next book is the tension of the gay faded matinee idol who, like Noah, goes on to be an extremely brave agent. And I think the common theme is that bravery comes in many different forms.
I think the other thing that has really drawn me into the book so far is that you don't shy away from showing the horrors of war. So, in some of the people's stories, you get people who are very badly injured, whose life is forever changed. And
well, thank you, Kaz, for saying that. I think that you have to draw quite a sort of careful line with telling it as it is, not sugarcoating it, and at the same time not sort of turning it into some type of pornography, because one can go too far one way or too far the other. And I hope that I've been able to sort of strike the right balance between telling it as it is in a fairly graphic way, but not, I hope, going completely over the top. And you're right. I mean, people in war, they die, they can be damaged physically, they can be damaged psychologically, and everything in between, as we know. And the tragedy, obviously, of the last century is just how many millions of people were affected.
I mean, I think you balance. I'm trying to sort of make the point here that it's not an easy read. I don't think that might be fair to say, but that because of some of the content, but it's well balanced. It's not dark all the way through. There's moments of lightness and joy and humor and
well, Kaz, thank you for saying that. And as an author, without sounding over the top, one of the great honors, frankly, of being a writer is, in people's very busy lives, is somebody or people just taking the time and the trouble to read your words. And although it may sound trite, as an author, there really is no higher honor than somebody taking the trouble to read your words and actually being affected by them. And so hearing people's reaction to the writing, I think, is probably one of the greatest aspects, frankly, of being a writer. It's seeing how your writing actually affects somebody else.
Is the part, so there's a little bit earlier on, and I don't think this is a spoiler, because we try to avoid those in our group.
Okay.
There's a part early on in it where she's writing children's stories. Is that a thing that she actually did?
Yes. And you can still find the book that she wrote is still in print. It's called 20 Jataka Tales. I always mispronounce it and say Jakarta Tales, but it's Jataka Tales. And it's a sort of, it's a reimagination of a lot of stories that were told to children that were meant to show the teachings of the Buddha and how people relate to the animal kingdom, the fleeting nature of life. But she was, in her time, a published children's author, and her book in the late 1930s actually did quite well. And so, again, you've got this strange conflict between a children's author and a musician who then goes on to become an armed spy.
So because you must have an immensely busy day job.
Yes.
How long did this take you?
Yeah.
To write alongside doing the
day job? Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And one of the questions I've been asked before is, have you ever been busted in court when you should have been focusing on the evidence and you were actually writing your book? To which I always say no comment. But the answer to your question is little and often. And I'm prepared to admit that when I first started writing this book, Britain was still part of the European Union. And so it really is kind of little and often. But if you write I don't know, in snatches when you're at court or at home in the mornings early on, that bit by bit you then start to get, to get going. But the answer to your question is, over many years, not doing it full time, finding snatches of time when I could. But it's one of those things that you really must want to do it, because the time that I spent writing, I could have been in the pub or doing many, many other things. And so, as any writer will tell you, writing doesn't necessarily make you that popular with those immediately around you.
You're not tempted to, once you finish these, write anything sort of with a bit of a legal basis, or?
Well, that's a very good question. The people that are involved on the publishing side, I'm just being sort of blunt here, they're very much like, this is all great with your Second World War SOE stuff, but what we really want is the terrorist legal blockbuster. And I think the answer to that question is I can't write that while I'm still in practice, because it would actually conflict with my professional standing and the fact that I, be referring to cases that I've done. But I think that one day when I hang up my wig, many years from now, hopefully, I'll be able to write the legal blockbuster, but it's not or the legal terrorist thriller blockbuster, but it's not something that I can do while I'm current. And your RAF friend will know, or may know, that I'm security vetted, and so at the moment, if I put pen to paper, I'd be in breach of the Official Secrets Act and God knows what other legislation. So that aspect of my writing will have to wait.
Do you hang out with the other kind of crime writing barristers, like people like Tony Kent?
Yes. I know Tony, and he set up a literary festival last year called Chiltern Kills near Gerrards Cross, and I was a speaker on a couple of his panels, and so I know Tony. And I've got another friend of mine who I actually know slightly better, is a guy called Imran Mahmood, who wrote something called You Don't Know Me, that then became a Netflix production. And he's a barrister who I've actually been in cases with. And he's just written a new book called Finding Sophie that's doing very well. And so there's the three of us, and then there's another barrister who you might have heard of called Rob Rinder, otherwise known as Judge Rinder. And he does his TV stuff, his barrister stuff, and he's just written a book that came out last year called The Trial. So there's a small number of sort of barrister writers, all of whom know each other.
Excellent. Well, we know Tony and Imran because they're part of the group.
Well, they're absolutely great, and I love the fact that Tony brands himself boxer first, barrister second, and writer third. I don't think he's actually boxed for about 10 years, but I like the fact that he's boxer stroke barrister. And Imran, I've just got a huge amount of time for. He's a very modest guy, but they're both phenomenal talents in my view.
You've been asked if you've read Finding Sophie.
Yes, I haven't actually read it yet, but everybody I've spoken to, all the reviews I've seen have all been very, very good. So well done to Imran.
I mean,
if you flip my book onto the back, you'll see that Imran is one of the people that has given a quote.
It is, yeah.
I didn't have to pay him too much. I didn't have to pay him too much for that.
You didn't buy him a pint for a quote.
He doesn't drink, Cass. He doesn't drink, but otherwise I would have done.
There's a little sort of, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, cameo from Aleister Crowley as well, isn't there?
There is.
In this. But
it's totally bizarre, but that's based on real events. Part of the book is set in a bookshop, as you know, which is 84 Charing Cross Road, which is where one of the protagonists, who goes on to become a chief cryptographer during the Second World War, was brought up in the dynasty of an antiquarian bookshop that was itself quite eccentric. That bookshop, I don't know whether you know this, was the subject of its own book and its own play. So there is a book out there called 84 Charing Cross Road that then became a play with Anthony Hopkins, and it's a series of letters between the very English manager of the bookshop and a young woman in New York who's a client, and it's just a very affectionate series of letters that are exchanged over a 30-year period that then became a play. So this bookshop was quite famous, and one of the many clients it had was Aleister Crowley, along with Sigmund Freud and various others. But the wickedest man in the world was a patron of this particular antiquarian bookshop that also happened to have strange, departments on esotericism and the occult. There's another word that I've actually forgotten it. It's to do with the occult. And so Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world, features in the book as a patron of this bookshop.
He's a fascinating guy, Aleister Crowley.
He is. I'll tell you
he had everywhere.
I'll tell you some Crowley trivia that you may or may not be aware of, but the cover for the Sgt. Pepper Beatles album on the big cover, Aleister Crowley is actually in it, which again is a bit of Aleister Crowley trivia that not everybody knows about.
My favourite bit of it was that he influenced Jack Parsons, who was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Lab.
Just bizarre.
Like, friends, and there's this glorious book you can read about like Jack Parsons doing weird rituals in the desert.
Just bizarre. And the other thing about Aleister Crowley is that he was in his youth a phenomenally impressive mountaineer, and he went on an expedition sort of up a very early it wasn't Everest, I think it was K2. And so this sort of strange man, when he was in his early 20s, was actually a very accomplished climber. Strange.
Very strange. Did you just write him in because he was a client of the bookshop, or did you want to make him like a little cameo in the?
I just thought a cameo from Aleister Crowley would be quite fun, and I think with any sort of book like this, you're sort of trying to add texture, and I think it gives a flavor of what kind of bookshop this was, because it is quite a central setting to the book, and having all these eccentric characters wandering in, I just thought Aleister Crowley demanded a small cameo just for interest.
Seems reasonable. If this became like the next Netflix or BBC blockbuster, who would you like to play in it?
Well, that's a very good question, Kaz. Has anybody in your group seen One Day on Netflix? Because
I haven't yet.
The female lead in One Day, when I was watching it, I just thought that is Noor. I'll get her name up. She's a British Asian, and her name is Ambika Mod. And she stars in One Day, which I saw earlier on this year, which is a Netflix production. That was a book that came out I think it came out in the 90s, and it's just become a Netflix drama. But when I was watching it, I thought, Ambika Mod, that is Noor. Just same as I imagine her to look, the way that she intones her voice, her expression. I mean, if I was doing the Hollywood version, I'd probably go for Penelope Cruz, but being realistic, I'd go for Ambika Mod.
But so you're like, if you were being a cameo in it, what would you do? Would you play anyone in particular? Would you just be the author in the bar, or?
If I was in the book, I think I would probably be Francis Suttle. I don't know whether you've come to him yet, but he's I hope, quite urbane barrister who goes on to become the leader of the main resistance circuit in Paris. He's somebody I identify with because we're both from the same profession. And the character of Suttle, as I was sort of discovering him, I drew a few parallels with myself, probably I'm flattering myself there, but I suspect that just because of commonality and similarity, he'd be the guy that I probably would associate with most.
Fair enough. You're quite adventurous when you're not being an author. What's this about kite surfing? And I don't even know what that is.
No, sure. Well, kite surfing is an extreme sport, an adrenaline sport, which is not for everybody. But if you imagine somebody is surfing on the water, but they're actually attached to a kite of some size with a harness around your waist, and you can have a kite that, you know, could be up to 12, 13 meters in diameter. And so that's what propels you through the sea. You need quite a lot of wind for kite surfing, but it's one of those things that I do to slightly clear my head. I do it in Greece, I do it in Egypt, and I do it in Morocco. And my perfect author day, if I ever have one, would be to get up early, do some writing, do some kite surfing, come back and do some more writing.
That sounds like a pretty awesome author day.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got a few more hellos. Sarah said her grandfather was in the army and was in Burma.
Okay. Respect.
Leslie and Mills have both said hello. Mills loved Codename Madeleine.
Oh, thank
Literally
you.
what it says, loved Codename Madeleine.
Thanks, Mills. I appreciate that enormously. And if anybody feels energized enough to go onto Amazon or Goodreads to give it a review, that they're always gold dust. I mean, the algorithm tends to look more at the stars than the reviews, but if you loved it, that would make all the difference.
The Mills will have done that, I'm sure.
Oh,
and she also has like an amazing taste in books, so she said that she's loved it.
Well, Mills, it's an absolute honor. That's made my evening. Thank you.
She's one of those people whose reviews you watch. Donna also said hello. She does interviews for with authors as well and organises events.
Well, guys, you know, I'm so very honoured that everybody, you know, that people have taken the trouble, and that the feedback is good. Because one of the risks, obviously, you take as a writer is that you are putting yourself out there, and if you're a barrister like me, as well as, so you've got like a sort of public profile as well as an author profile. You know, the risk is you write a novel or your book, and everybody falls about laughing, and so you slightly take your heart in your mouth when your book comes out. But I've been very lucky that the feedback generally has been very good.
And you haven't taken like Tony's approach either, have you? And gone for a slightly different pen name. Like you've just gone with your name for both the author and.
Yes, and that's a very good question. And I did go through some discussions, you know, with those behind the publication about whether I should do it under my name. But in the end, I think that the view that was taken was that it was actually better just to publish under my own name. There's no right or wrong answer, but I was content to put my actual and professional name to the book. And the fact that, you know, the book has a barrister in it and I'm a barrister, that actually, in a sense, makes even more sense to use my own name. And the fact that my grandfather was involved with SOE, it then becomes all part of the narrative behind the book.
Yeah, I've met the barrister in the book. I think there's a bit where they're talking about a case where they
the snail.
take them to court for the snail and the
that's right. It's Donahue and Stevenson, which is the case that we all learn about in law school, where a woman buys a bottle of ginger beer, drinks it, finds there's a decomposing snail in the bottom and becomes extremely ill. And the question is, can she sue the shopkeeper, or can she actually sue the company that made the ginger beer? So it becomes a huge case in terms of who's liable. So in 1932, that was the case of the year.
That was one of the other like little touches that I thought was really fascinating, because they're having a whole kind of ethical discussion about it, aren't they? You know, like the outcome of the case. And I was just like, this is really fascinating.
Yeah, well, that's. I hope it's authentic, because that's the kind of discussion that probably would have gone on amongst young student barristers, 100 and whatever it was, 90 years ago. And as you may know or may not know, but in order to become a barrister, you have to pass all sorts of exams, but you also have to join an inn of court. And that means you have to attend a certain number of dinners where you're put with other barristers. And it's the social side of becoming a barrister. And that, I think, is quite authentic.
You had a hello from Shamila as well. Mills said she fell down a rabbit hole on Google after she read that bit, and Leslie wants to know if she successfully sued.
The outcome of Donoghue and Stevenson was that the House of Lords, which is now the Supreme Court, it was a narrow judgment, 3-2, but the House of Lords found, from memory, that she could sue the manufacturer. And so on a narrow interpretation, so two of the judges said it's a contract case simply between the shopkeeper and the buyer of the bottle of ginger beer. But the majority of the court said no, it's wider than that. The manufacturer of the ultimate manufacturer of the bottle didn't have their proper protocols in place. Snail got into the bottle, and so she could sue the manufacturer for negligence, which wasn't a particularly well heard of term. And now, of course, negligence is everywhere. And so the reason for the importance of the case is that it was the birth, effectively, of negligence.
I think it's a little bit like that case, the appearance of Aleister Crowley, the other characters and things that kind of lift this book into being like a book that you kind of want to savor as you read it, because there's a lot of things you want to read a bit and then think about.
I hope so.
Or go down a rabbit hole on Google.
And what's also interesting is that you picked up on the character of Treasure, and she's also actually one of my favorite characters, and she is based on actually a number of different people. She's not based on a specific individual. She's like an amalgam, but she appears in the second book as well.
That's marvelous news. Absolutely love her to bits.
Yeah, she's just great.
Yeah, from the minute you meet her, she's just
yeah. She's just fantastic, and I think I think entirely authentic. I think that there were a lot of, well, not a lot, but there were treasures around at that time, and that was the life that they were pitched into, and they had to kind of make the best of it.
And there's like people coming back. So there's like the sergeant in the First World War who's then Noor's teacher later on. I really like that.
Yes. I mean, I try and create these, as I said, hairs that start to run. And I hope one of the satisfying aspects of the book is how you see all the strings, all the strands of the story start to wind together at the end. And I'd be really intrigued to know when you finish the book, just to hear your feedback once you've finished it all, because there is a great, it's the opposite of an unraveling. There's a great sort of raveling, if you like, at the end, so that hopefully everything comes a little bit together.
I'm intrigued to see how they all come together. I ran out of time at lunchtime. I got sidetracked into sorting out some stuff, and I was like still reading.
Oh, well, I'm very flattered. The one other thing I would say is that there is an audiobook as well that is of the book that's read by somebody I know called Olivia Williams, who's an actress of some stature. She's Camilla in The Crown, and she's somebody that I knew from university, and she read the book. And for her, it's an enormous challenge, because of course she's got to be about 30 or 40 different people, different ages, different genders. There's different languages, but she was able to narrate the whole thing.
Shamila's really looking forward to the second book. Mills wants to know when the second book is out. She said she's not been on Twitter much.
Yeah, sure. I think the answer is hopefully next year, if I keep to my deadline. You talked about the film with Codename Madeline, there was a film that came out in 2019 called A Call to Spy, which I have to say I haven't seen. And so that, in a sense, has been done as a film. But I am actually in discussion with a film company about the second book, Codename God Given. And so if it becomes a film as well as a book, that would be fantastic.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, it would.
Leslie's interested to know my review because she loves audiobooks.
Okay, gotcha.
Leslie's another person who gives really good reviews.
Well, I'm delighted that, you know, such high-profile reviewers are part of this group. I mean, the reality is that no matter how good a book is, it doesn't go anywhere without reviewers. I mean, reviewers are the lifeblood of any book. And I've been lucky that, you know, it's had some good reviewers, but, you know, a book without reviewers, it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm very conscious as an author that the enormous debt one owes to reviewers who read and review.
Leslie said a film has to be every author's dream. Mills says she's not a reviewer, she's a book gobshite.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, got it. I'm sure there's a subtle distinction. But frankly, anybody that is interested and you know, they read, and however they disseminate their reviews for authors, you know, they're very important. I mean, I think on Twitter, I made a film to thank some of the book bloggers on Twitter when it came out for their reviews, because actually that was what sort of pitched the book forward. I mean, it had some reviews for some high-profile individuals, but it was more like the everyday bloggers. If you've got one blogger that's got, I don't know, 2,000 followers on Twitter, but you've got 20 of them, you then start to get quite a lot of traction. So they're very important.
You were saying that it's sort of hard to find. I mean, again, I would imagine you're also limited by the day job. But it's hard to find sort of places for author events. Have you got any author events coming up?
Yes, I'm trying to do some festivals later in the year. So I'm going back to Tony Kent's festival in October. I'm trying to do one in Corfu in Greece in September. And I'm also putting my name forward for a festival at Cliveden at the Country House, which I think is also in September. But there's a clash with one of my cases, which is out of the jurisdiction. So the answer is I will do what I can. And then I think I'm going to be interviewing Tony Kent at a bookshop, and he interviewing me, which is on a sort of more informal basis. But the main one, I think, is going to be Chiltern Kills Mark II in October. And if anybody's interested in coming down from, you know, wherever you guys are based, I thought it was a fantastic day, beautiful grounds, and they had, I don't know, people turning up with fish and chip vans and a well-stocked bar. And actually the day I thought was just a beautiful afternoon and evening.
We're kind of a worldwide group. We've got people all over.
Okay. Well, if anybody's near Gerrard's Cross, that's where Chiltern Kills is.
Not tempted to do Harrogate? That's what Sarah's asking.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is I am tempted to do Harrogate. The only hesitation I've got is that Harrogate, I think, is mainly a crime writers festival. With Chiltern Kills, I was kind of allowed in as an espionage writer, but slightly through the back door. And I sort of wonder with Harrogate whether I fit their criteria. But I've heard that Harrogate is a lot of fun. And so I think I need to do it sometime, but it may probably not be this year, but if not this year, maybe next year.
I would say you meet the criteria, but also it is just a lot of fun, and you don't necessarily need to just do a panel. You can just go and hang.
Yeah, well, that's very good advice.
Authors and things.
Yeah, I mean, as an author, as a debut author, you're sort of slightly entering a new world. But everything I've heard about Harrogate sounds great. And my friend, I don't know if you know the novelist Anna Mazzola. She was at Tony's Chiltern Kills last year, but she said, if you want to go to a festival and there be some scandal, it's Harrogate every time. So if that isn't temptation to go to Harrogate, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's Donna's saying you should definitely do Harrogate, but she loved Chiltern Kills.
Okay, I'll bear it in mind.
I think it's one of those big ones where everyone comes together, isn't it? The ones where that happens are lovely. Little festivals are nice. We run our own live event, and that's nice. But it is nice to go to the big ones and just
sure.
hang out with everyone.
And it's also great to meet, other authors and readers, and sign books. A lot of the reviews that I got last year were from people I met at Chiltern Kills that I actually signed a book over to, and where you personally meet your reader, the writer meets the reader. It's a different relationship. Obviously, it's much more intimate.
Okay, so we've got two people saying opposite things. Someone's agreeing with Anna, and someone's saying they've never known scandal at Harrogate. I think that's tongue in cheek. That's Donna, and she's definitely probably behind some scandal at Harrogate.
Yes. Well, either Harrogate is full of scandal, or we have to go and create some scandal.
I think creating scandal in Harrogate would be an excellent plan. What if my favourite question to ask people at North Chat at the moment is, what have you read this year that you've really enjoyed?
God, that's a good question. I'm actually rereading some Hemingway at the moment, and I'm reading The Sun Also Rises, which is one of his Spanish Civil War books, or it becomes part of the Spanish Civil War. And I would say that I am enjoying it. I'm not enjoying it quite as much as I thought I would, but I am enjoying it. And then I'm actually reading also a non-fiction book, and I'm really happy to sort of recommend it because it's actually part of a case that I'm doing. But it's called No Ordinary Day, and it's by a police officer. And it may be that people weren't alive back in 1984, but a female police officer was shot dead outside the Libyan embassy in London by somebody inside the Libyan embassy, and it became this great cause célèbre. And the police officer who was standing next to the victim, he is bringing the case, which is the book is called No Ordinary Day, but actually I'm involved in a murder case from 40 years ago through various strange reasons. But as a gripping sort of real life John le Carré, I think No Ordinary Day is a very good book. If it was to hand, I'd hold it up, but it came out last year, and the author it's John Murray, and he's written it with a ghostwriter. But for a real life Le Carré non-fiction book, it's a page turner.
So those are your two recommendations for the moment.
I think the latter would be my recommendation if people are happy to read sort of non-fiction. But I was gripped by the book, and it's one of those things that the anniversary of the shooting is coming up next month, and so I suspect that those of your group and you will probably see here on the news that this becomes quite a big talking point in about a month. The WPC was called Yvonne Fletcher, and at the time it caused a national scandal, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine. So for the sake of people like Mills who joined us late, do you want to give them a little bit of an update about what book 2 might be about? About what book 2 might be about. Tell us what you can about book 2 again for the sake of Mills.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, I'm very happy. So book 1 is about a wireless operator in the Special Operations Executive who goes into occupied Paris, and she's a misfit because she's from a Sufi mystical background, children's author and musician. Book 2 is also based on an SOE wireless operator who was also a misfit, former circus acrobat, became an actor, and by the beginning of the Second World War was a slightly faded matinee idol. He was rejected from military service, partly because of his age, but also partly because of his sexuality. And then he got a clerical job in the army and was then recruited by SOE and went on to, like Noor, to win the Military Cross. And so I think that the commonality of the two books is that you can't judge people, and bravery can come in any number of different forms. It can be a gay faded matinee idol, and it can be a pacifist Sufi's daughter musician. we simply don't. You don't know how bravery is going to come out. So that's the second book, which is for next year, I hope. And then actually there is a third in the pipeline, which is codenamed Marie, which is about an American woman who was SOE trained and then became an SOE agent in Lyon and started running all of the operations in the unoccupied area of France. And she was, again, a misfit. She had a hunting accident in the 1930s. She lost part of her leg. So she had a wooden leg. So it was a one-legged American woman who sort of saved the world in book 3. So they're all misfits and they're all extremely brave.
Follow-up questions about the book. Have you had a go at wireless operating?
Do you know something? I haven't. I live fairly close to the Imperial War Museum, and so I have actually seen, I haven't touched it, but I have seen a Mark II transmitter. And I have to be absolutely honest, I find cryptography to be one of the most difficult aspects of anything. And so the way, you know, when I was writing it in the book, I actually found it quite hard. So I haven't actually had a go at cryptography. And I suspect that if I did, I would fail. Okay.
You're honest about these
things. I mean, but having said that, I have spent time with a harpist because I wanted to know what it was like to hold a harp. And so I was introduced to a harp player in Brixton in London, and I spent an afternoon in her studio, and just to get the weight of the harp and the way you pluck the strings, so that when I write about Noor's harp playing, I actually have a little bit of an idea about the practicalities of playing the harp.
Have you visited the dervishes? Because you talked about the whirling.
I haven't visited the dervishes. The furthest, I mean, I have been to that part of the world, to Turkey, but I've never actually seen the whirling dervishes, and I think that's something I need to do. You know, that's on my bucket list, is the answer.
It would be mine too.
Yes.
I've been to Turkey. I lived there for a bit, but I've never seen them either.
Yeah. No, I would love to. I would love to.
Mills has said, have you read any of Nadine Matheson's books?
Do you know, I haven't, but I'm just going to make a note of that. I mean, there are so many wonderful writers, and but anyway, I'm going to put that down in my notebook. Nadine Matheson.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that I'm going to investigate in about half an hour.
And Sarah says, you've never been to Bletchley Park?
I have been to the grounds of Bletchley Park some time ago, but I never actually went in. I had a sort of fleeting visit past Bletchley Park, but for whatever reason, either it wasn't open or there was an issue. The reality is, Kaz, and to everybody that's listening, in an ideal world, you know, I mean, this book is set in South America, in India, in all sorts of parts of the world. It's got cryptography, it's got U-boat warfare, and in an ideal world, you know, I would have sat in a U-boat, or at least whatever we have left of U-boats, and sat in the command post. And ideally, you know, I would have carried a cyanide capsule around Paris with a Mark II radio transmitter and everything else that the SOE spy carried. And the reality is that you simply cannot do everything. And so, although the book displays, I think, a very high level of research, it's really impossible to cover all bases personally. And so, therefore, there is a degree, you know, of poetic license. Have I been to the bookshop at 84 Charing Cross Road? Yes, I have. Briefly. Have I been to Treasure's flat in Balcombe Street? I can't say that that's true, but this will mean something to you, Kaz. But one of the really strange coincidences of the book is that Treasure, as you know, is based at 70-something Balcombe Street, and Olivia Williams, the narrator, is based 2 doors down, and I didn't know that. Just of all the streets in London, she lived literally 2 doors down, because, you know, I'd lost touch with her. And so that was just one of the sort of strange coincidences.
Mills has said, and I was just about to say the same, like it felt like you really knew all of the locations and the things that you were writing about. So your research clearly paid off.
Yes, and in South America, for example, I mean, I have been to South America, but I couldn't say that I traced all of Canaris's movements from Chile to Argentina. I have been to South America, but I haven't been everywhere. And so I don't know if people have read The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Seguro. I mean, he's a guy that is assuming he gets behind the eyes of a butler. And I think part of the writer's art is researching your subject matter very carefully, but then you just take the leap and then you start describing it, as you think your characters would have perceived it.
And it's been very well done. Donna has also said she lives half an hour from Bletchley Park and has never been.
Okay. Well, living in central London, it's very embarrassing because people always say, when we last at the British Museum or at the Royal Opera House or whatever, and the answer is sometimes not for a while.
I think if you live in a place, though, you don't go to see the tourist things.
Yeah, well, that's you're absolutely right. That's the great. I mean, at the moment, I'm trying to go to the theatre every week, whether I like it or not, because it's just a question of just taking advantage of London's amazing cultural scene. But you've got to sort of give yourself a kick in the backside, which is quite weird. Force yourself.
Yeah, I guess. I think I've seen all of these tourist attractions. I'm not convinced I need to go back anytime soon.
Oh, sure.
I think this is Donna again. She said she wishes the school took them.
What's that? She wishes?
She wishes their school had taken them. That'd been a great school trip somewhere like Bletchley Park. I think we looked at it, but it's just too far to take our kids.
Yeah, it's also meant to be completely hideous as well. It's meant to be one of the ugliest buildings in the world.
Really?
So it was designed by, apparently it is just an architectural monstrosity, but of its time, but it's not a great architectural gem. It's meant to be quite hideous.
Oh, now this is an evil question. We've been asked who your favorite author is.
Can I answer that? It has to be one author, or can I have sort of 2 or 3?
I think you can have multiples. I have more than one favorite author.
Okay. I am a great fan of Tolstoy. I haven't actually read War and Peace and Anna Karenina for some time, but I think that of the books that affected me most when I was growing up, probably Anna Karenina affected me the most. And it's actually one of the reasons why I chose a female protagonist in Codename Madeline. And I think Tolstoy does a brilliant job of telling the story about Anna Karenina, having a female protagonist. And so I'm a big fan of Tolstoy. I'm a big fan of Hemingway. I'm half American on my dad's side. And so the other novelist I've always admired is F. Scott Fitzgerald. Not everybody likes The Great Gatsby, but I think it's an almost perfect book, and some of the descriptions in it I think are also almost sublime. But I like Hemingway partly because of his war correspondence work and the fact that he writes about war in a way that F. Scott Fitzgerald doesn't. So those probably would be my favorite ones. I've left out English authors, of which there are a great many, but I think I probably can't go beyond 3.
You could have gone beyond 3. We wouldn't have objected.
Okay.
I have too many. It's fine, Paul. Because I think there's just too many people who's, once you've read them, like their books are the ones that you would always buy. They become your favorite authors.
I mean, again, that's the other thing about writing, is that you're entering an arena where, there are so many books and there are so many good authors, and, you go through this thing of thinking, can I participate in this amazing game, and should I, and all the rest of it. But I think everybody, every generation, every writer, has got something to contribute, hopefully.
Well, you've also seen that there's comments on here of people who've read it and are eager for more books.
Well,
so
that's a good sign. It's a good start.
Thing to take away, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I'll send you information when the second book comes out, and I'll also give an indication where and when the launch is. And so if we can have some representatives of members of your group at the launch next year in London, if anybody's around, that would be an honor.
I'm sure there will be. But yeah, thank you again. The time's flown. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for everybody for everything, and it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I'm really grateful, Kaz. And I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end of the book. But for now, thank you all very much indeed.